Thank you, Mark. And well, I will do my best also to not be too long, because I understand some here certainly know already the legislation. So I have a bit modified the title, because you were strongly focusing on the platforms, and I know you do, and that is, but I'm speaking about what is in place, and so that is not all on this. So I would just point to some directives, and I will go most in detail on the WE directive, so the directive on waste from electrical and electronic equipment of relevance to you. But we also have other legislation, environmental legislation, so it's ROS, it's about hazardous substances in electronics, it's about, it's about batteries. We have packaging, of course, all these goods have to be packed when shipped. And with the increase in online sales, we have, by the way, which is also an environmental issue, just a tremendous increase in the packaging. So that is something. Now, aside from here, we also have cars. We have a directive on end-of-life vehicles, and they are also in particular for spare parts and so on. Is online sales are also becoming increasingly relevant. So we have actually two aspects under this legislation. On one hand, it's a so-called extended producer responsibility, and I've put this in bold because it's the main aspect here, which I think where there is an issue in relation to the compliance, so-called free riders is now of everything, let's say a number of actors in the online field. And we have, of course, also the aspect, but this was all what Hans in fact covered, of product compliance, because well, we have provisions on substances in these products, and mainly, and so of course it's also an issue that also under environmental law there has to be a compliance with these provisions. But for this I would want to refer actually to all what Hans has said, because they are also taken up in these 70 or so directives which are covered. So now coming more to the EPR, the Extended Producer Responsibility, and I will focus on the WE directive, but I should say that, and it will later come on to one, that the whole approach is of the same relevance to the packaging, for instance, and packaging waste directive. At present, there is no EPR obligatory for packaging and packaging waste, but member states have it in place, about all, but one, I think. And so the issues arise in the same way, but it will be obligatory also, as it is agreed now in the new waste package. So EPR means that the producer has a financial responsibility, basically, and organizational, for the collection, treatment, recovery, and disposal of waste from electronics. And, well, that's really in a nutshell. Then other provisions which I think are relevant for online sales is the provision of separate collections. So member states have to ensure that distributors are responsible for so-called one-to-one return free of charge. So when you buy a product, that you can give your old product back. And for bigger retail shops, also return of very small WE free of charge. Member states are to collect, are to organize the collection, and they have targets for this. And all these links also into the online sales issue. And lastly, practically, there is a register to be established by member states to monitor compliance with the provisions, and actually producers or their authorized representatives have to register in the member states where they place products on the market, and they have to report. So they have to report on the quantities and so on in order to be able to lastly establish compliance with the requirements under the directive. So now, where does the online or distance sales aspects come in? The producer is defined as any natural or legal person who, and it says irrespective of the selling technique used, including distance communication, sells electrical and electronic equipment, among other things. I mean, there are other points in the definition of producer, but it is also made clear that a producer is also the one who sells it by means of distance communication directly to private households and users other than private households in a member state, and is established in another member state or in a third country, so also from outside the EU. Distributor is any natural or legal person who makes the electrical and electronic equipment, it's difficult to read when I'm available on the market. And this does not, and the distributor can be at the same time a producer. So there is an obligation for producers supplying electrical and electronic equipment by means of distance communication to be registered, as I said before, in the member state where they sell to. And when they not, and they can also, or they can comply with this obligation by appointing an authorized representative in this member state. And conversely, the member states are to ensure that a producer that is established in one member state's territory appoints an authorized representative the moment it sells to another member state, in that member state actually. And there are also provisions on administrative cooperation and exchange of information between member states' authorities responsible for the implementation in the directive. So this is just putting it all together again. So once again, the directive applies to products and producers irrespective of the selling technique, including distance and electronic selling. And the collection obligations, they also apply as far as practical, taking the same form, and they shall be in principle enforced in the same way as for other distribution channels. And this is all it, of course, in order to avoid that there are, well, the complying or the channels which are not online have to bear the costs lastly, because I say the producers have to finance all this of those who don't participate. So in relation to this directive, there are actually three groups of issues faced. On one hand, the so-called free riding that consists in not undertaking the physical take-back obligations. So, well, because you are just not there, you will not establish this one-to-one take-back. And by not paying the share of the cost of remanagement required and by not reporting. And maybe I should put this in bold because I understand this is the biggest concern. And also, free riding, of course, will contribute to underestimating the number of products placed on the market, and lastly, it will falsify the whole calculation of collection rates, which is an obligation by the member states to reach. And then you have also, and this was mentioned, of course, from the side of the online sellers, that registering in each member state where the electronic appliances are sold and to report to the national register is, of course, burdensome. There are different formats, there are different requirements, and so there is a call. Yeah, is this better? Yes, it's better. Oh, sorry. And there is a call for harmonizing this registration and reporting formats, which actually we are doing. And then is an issue from this side, of course, for the cost of appointing also an authorized representatives and above all, to know about all this, to be informed, to be aware of all it. On all these aspects, there are some examples of good practice in the member states. I will not go in detail now into this. Mainly it's on the first aspect, how the take-back is organized. I understand, and I think this is probably of particular interest here, that this whole issue of the compliance, when you can't get what is defined as a producer responsible, is much of interest here. And there maybe I should point to what seems to be in the German law, which they call a fiction of producer. So any distributor who offers electrical and or electronic equipment from not correctly registered producers is then deemed to be a producer, and so it is assuming the functions and the responsibility of the producer. I mean, this would be probably interesting to look more closely into. So, as said, on one hand we have a problem, an issue of awareness. I mean, how to make online sellers and operators, in particular based outside the EU, aware of all this. And we have an issue of enforcement. And so what I would like to mostly focus on, and I will certainly come to it, but we are not for the moment in a process of changing our legislation. We have heard about the goods package, and I think there are a number of instruments and and so on, which we can certainly be inspired from. But so we are focusing very much on working together. We have over the last 2 years, we had engaged with the member states, so-called compliance promotion initiative. This is on everything which has to do with the implementation of the directive. But online sales was pointed out as an issue to be further deepened, which actually we still have to do. So we have proposed also to the member states different mechanisms of peer-to-peer, so the possibility to learn from good practice in other member states. And we will go on with this in among other things, focusing particularly on online sales and the issues related to it. Then there is an initiative which is a bit, well, let's say bottom up, a network of the sanction and enforcement bodies from the member states, which was initiated by the German Environment Agency. So they are getting together. It was starting with 13 member states, maybe there are more now. I'm not sure, only started in 2017. And so the idea is indeed to cooperate in prosecution of cross-border free riders and to exchange best practice on this. And they do this actually in exchanging information, so sending, when information evidence is available about so-called free riders, so sending the report to the responsible national authority in the other member states, creating a platform for discussing the experience, and they've also provided a standardized complaint form against cross-border free riders. And so all this can be accessed. The issue is now for the platform, for the network, of course, to have more members, ideally all the EU member states, and to well, in general terms, of course, be able to continue and be more known with their activities. And we have them always in our exchanges on the directive, meetings with the member states, and we would very much like to support this. We will also explore how we can link it up to other networks. So as I said before, this was very much focusing on the WE directive. We have the same issues basically in practice arising under the packaging and packaging waste directive. Maybe sometimes they're even more complicated. Now there, the EPR is obligatory, so the extended producer responsibility also at EU level. Member states have to establish these systems where they don't yet exist. And then I would like to come to the last part actually of the relevant rules and provision, and this is exactly on this EPR, so the extended producer responsibility. Yes, because one thing which is of course said, so how will the poor online sellers get their way in all these systems which are so complicated, different in every member state, where in part already operator fully integrated in the member states can't do it. And this is why we have to, with a new waste legislation which has been broadly overhauled this in the last years, and we have adopted now the new legislation this summer, we have a whole set of requirements on how these EPR systems, the extended producer responsibility, is to be organized, and in particular focus on accountability, transparency. And I should just highlight to some provisions which are in particular relevant to online sales. So there is an obligation to establish reporting systems on how the data on products placed on the market are gathered, on the collection, treatment and the material flows. And then I will jump a bit to ones which are also relevant, but not so much just only in this context. And I should say that in particular member states have to provide for an adequate monitoring and enforcement framework with respect to all the obligations under extended producer responsibility, the financial means and the reporting. And then in this context, member states may be more specific and lay down requirements for monitoring, such as information, registration and reporting requirements. And there is to be a regular stakeholder dialogue on all this, on the functioning of the systems. So with all this being a bit of an insight into the different instruments which are of relevance, I should say the next steps particularly relevant on one hand under the WE directive. we will finalize a format for registration and reporting to registers, which should be at the European level, well, applied by all member state registers. So they are facilitate this and harmonize to the extent possible. I should say that we also, I mentioned before, under the compliance promotion, we have something very, very down to earth. We will have continue to look into the good practice of the member states and exchange, because we hear a lot of this, and in particular also in events like today. But we would like to focus more specifically on online sales. And well, I mentioned on this EPR package, which I said before, this is a law now. It has to be transposed, well, the whole directive by July 2020. And then member states have still some time, 54 months, to comply with it. But in the meantime, we are developing guidance, in particular, well, among other things, on issues such as cross-border cooperation and online sales. And we have just launched a study to work on this. So online sales is one particular focus, and hope we will be able to publish this guidance by the end of 2019. I have some further ideas, but I think we can probably, there will be a discussion, so I think we can go into this then.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. And